we're going to go ahead, get started. We are on, 159A today. And 159 means that we have 58 kits behind us, which if you divide that by 12, that's over 4 years, going into 5 years of kits now that we've been doing. And as those of you who have been here with us before, we alternate wines. We'll go through them. Madeline always bats leadoff because she is the best leadoff hitter of all of that. And then because there's only 2 of us today, we will alternate wines back and forth. We'll talk about them. We'll take some questions. And then as always, we will conclude today with a happy half hour for those folks that want to hang out with Madeline and myself afterwards, enjoy a little bit more wine, and have wine questions answered. So without further ado, Maddie, all yours.
I don't know what a lead hitter is.
That's in baseball. You're the one who takes you come up to bat first. You set the table for everybody else. And given the fact that the World Series is starting literally today.
Well, you taught me about baseball. He's taken me to 2 games in San Francisco. And I know, enough to be really dangerous. So lead hitter that I am. For those of you who are here for the first time, we adore everyone, but rookies are our very favorites today. And Evan is demonstrating really the only way you can assess color, on an angle against a white surface. Try not to drop it on your laptop, Madeline, but all of a sudden, it's not just white wine. In this particular case, it's just a beautiful, true yellow, maybe a little on the pale side. We give a little look for green glints. And my glass has a little olive in it, which means that olive green, which telegraphs what? The wine's youth. When you swirl it, you can either do it, the way we see everybody do. Don't go berserk and think that doing this is going to make the wine more expressive. I think it annoys it. Or you can just, and I learned this from Tim, we all learn from each other, you can just turn it because it's going to evaporate off the sides of the glass. By the way, these questions that are up here, especially if you're relatively new at this game or you're wondering how our brains work, it doesn't hurt to have something to look for if you feel like it. And the questions I put up here is the ever-present important one, because we all consider fruit immediately. What non-fruit aromas do you perceive? AKA flowers, wood, herbs, etc. How would you quantify, meaning medium plus, high, and qualify, describe the mouthfeel and texture involving the acidity in this wine? And finally, the whole inorganic earth phrase, which I keep telling people, if somebody can come up with something other than rocky minerality, I owe them a fruit cake or a frozen spanakopita that I will make myself, and then you can reheat. So we're back to the color, and it looks like a true yellow or maybe a pale yellow with some green glints. Viscosity, and we are looking at how the wine whirls and how it runs. It appears to be moderate, and this is telegraphing an impression of both extract and alcohol. So, no big story here. Sometimes, we all have personal ways of doing this. I may speak to the aroma alone or tie it in directly to palate, because as we all know, fragrance and flavor are the same thing with the exception of sweet, sour, bitter, salt, right? When you can't smell it, that's what you get. So aromatically, and I haven't tasted this yet today. I wanted to do it with you. It is delicate and distinct. It's a really beautiful aroma that's driven by fresh citrus. The first thing I get is this gorgeous lemon. And I don't think sweet citrus. It's not so much Meyer lemon to me as just true lemon. And it's got a little bit of a peel quality, oily quality to it as well. Tree fruit immediately, green apple and yellow apple, and pear, combo pears. I always think of Boss because that's what they eat, but that's what I eat, but probably a little Bartlett too. If there is stone fruit, it's like slightly underripe or white. The whole white nectarine factor. If there is tropical, it's a slightly underripe pineapple. There is a gorgeous florality to this wine that's coming across really like white tree fruit blossoms, apple blossoms, maybe a teeny little bit of jasmine. Herbal characteristics are, when I think of verbena, I always think of lemon verbena, so it's tied to the citric aspect of it. I'm not really picking up anything wood derived other than maybe a little bit of ginger. And there is a little bit of a lees component in this wine. I'm not getting overt malolactic, but what I do get is a distinct sea spray, salty, chalky minerality, rockiness to it. This is a complex white wine. And I know sometimes for those of you who blind taste for a purpose, aka getting a credential, whites are often tougher than reds. There might be a whisper of reduction, but I think I'm imagining it. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate. I love the aroma, but just to, recap, it is citrus driven, tree fruit driven, but it's got, several other categories coming right on their heels. So on the palate, I'm old school, so I always pull in a little bit of air and make that lovely ill-mannered sound. Whoa, the attack is about citrus and the acidity is bracing. I'm actually, and there's a little bit of a phenolic character to this wine also. Probably my friends Evan and Tim don't like it when I say it, so I'll whisper it. It's like white wine tannin. There's a little bit of bitterness from skin contact. But I'm going to tell you a secret for me. If the acidity is this bracing, I immediately go back to it because my palate's going, got it, we're doing acidity. And I want it to be a little less dramatic. I also, my party trick that I came to late in my professional life, I hold it for a minute, just hold it, even without chewing it, and it gives me a plumb line of flavor. Pretty much everything that I perceived on the nose is being reflected on the palate. I get a little chill when I say that. It's so cool when a wine is this balanced. The acidity is, for me, I would say high, but pleasantly. It doesn't lock down the rest of the wine. It's just bracing. But that's how I would qualify it and quantify it. The rocky minerality, that sea spray or whetstone character is quite prominent. The citrus I already mentioned. Is there wood on this wine? I would imagine probably, but used. It's certainly not commanding my attention in terms of fragrance and flavor, but there's a relax aspect to it that might have to do with the subtext of the aerobic component of either barrel fermentation or barrel aging. So it's blended oak and or used oak or a combination of containers. There is definitely a subtle but perceivable influence of lees that has to do with the richness of the mouthfeel, underneath the bracing acidity. And I think there's a subtle nuttiness to this in terms of the sweet nuts. I don't get too precious about this, but if I had to claim them, I would say cashew, macadamia. This wine is kind of linear, but if you pay close attention to it, there's a lot going on. Shall we put the poll up?
Yeah, that was brilliant, Madeline. And what's surprising to me about this wine is, to your point, it's a powerful wine, and it's a powerful wine for a white wine. Yet there's an incredible sort of elegance about it at the same time. But I digress. So what do we got grape wise here?
I'll tell you what we got here, but I will tell you the Detroiter who's not driving tonight. I just swallowed it because it's good. So, by the way, these polls are anonymous. You're doing all y'all, yourselves, and everybody else on here a big favor. Please participate in them, and it helps us too. What is the wine telling you? And we've got options of Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, and Pinot Gris / Grigio for the whites. The short version, and I like simplicity, so I beeline to the fact that both Chardonnay and Pinot Gris are considered what we call not, either neutral or non-aromatic varieties, meaning they don't have a strong natural presence, like, what's like the flower garden that Torrontés has. Just to give an extreme example of aromatic, Chenin is a very interesting grape because it is really semi-aromatic, sometimes less, sometimes more. It tends to have a lot of stone fruit, but it's got plenty of acidity, and especially if it's in the Loire, plenty of minerality. Chardonnay, as we all know, is is a happy, noble blank slate waiting for the terroir of a region and the hand of the winemaker to give it specific expression. And Pinot Grigio can be straightforward and simple if it's modest Italian, but it can be, you know, very rich, even greasy, verging on sweet if it's from Alsace. The regions will, you know, follow suit, France and Italy for all three. South Africa for Chenin for sure, but definitely for Chardonnay, not so much Pinot Grigio, and California, name your game. You know, very interesting to see where you take this, because this is not a spoiler alert, but a teeny little hint. I don't think it's evident easily.
Yeah. And I think it's important just to point out quickly, Madeline, before we go on our little airplane ride, other is always going to be there for people who are new to us, so that if you didn't end up with one of the grapes, or you think it's from a place that's different than the three, or in this case, four geographies that are listed there, please go ahead and check it. And then if you can, and you've got the courage, because it's helpful for everybody. It's a great teaching moment for everybody. Go ahead and put them in the chat and we can address some of those choices.
81%.
There you go. It's good for a first wine. Again, this is as anonymous as Madeline said, so vote early, vote often. We are ending the poll now, and here we go. Madeline, what do we got?
Very interesting. I like the fact that it's not, you know, on off. It is leading with Chenin, with a Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio on a tie, and I'm dying to see whoever you know, if you can put in the chat, the other folks, what you think it is. France, Italy, South Africa. I can't see the bottom of my, oh, here, my thing wasn't working. Here we go. I'm trying to see how much said.
Italian Vermentino.
Nothing. So all Europe. I, by the way, am one of the people who will say old world / Europe, because I don't find it bothersome. South Africa really is its own duck, right? It's been around for a long time, but it tends to have elements of New World expression as well as European. Rock and roll. I get the aisle seat in business class. Are we starting from your house, Evan?
Yeah, we are. You're lucky if you get an aisle seat in business class these days. It's harder to get those upgrades. Yeah.
I take an aisle seat anywhere in the plane, including the very back, just so I don't get, you know, squirrely. So
I got the middle seat yesterday, but hopefully we're not going to, this is a short flight. So here we go.
This wasn't 12 hours, right? So we are going across the pond. We are going to the Southern Hemisphere. We are, bravissimo to those of you who called it. We're in South Africa. We are Crystallum wines. This is and actually they are pulling grapes from two sources for this, from Overberg and also from Hemel and Arde, which I love, heaven and earth, whoever named that. Must have been in the middle of the night with some South African beer, right? I always think the Aussies name all their stuff that way. So this is, you know, if you're not familiar with South Africa, fully realized, incredibly complex growing region, one long bad hair day. You've got the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean. Either pull it back or cut it off when you go there. The most staggeringly beautiful growing region I've ever been to. This particular producer is famous for their Pinot Noirs and Chardonnay. And as I mentioned, they're pulling grapes from vineyard sites in Overberg and Hemel and Arde. And let's reveal the label. This is an operation that was founded in 2007. It is Crystallum, which if you look at the fine print, wines by, I love it. Both the brothers are on here. Andrew and Peter Allen Finlayson. Their dad started this, and they've taken the ball. They named this is so cool, the Agnes, after, is it their great-grandmother? Hold the boat, I've got it right here. Yes, their great-grandmother, Agnes Floyd, came to South Africa at age 14, was the first woman, proud to say it, who got a driver's license in Cape Town. And they're naming her, they're naming this wine after her because of the resilience and strength of Agnes. In terms of production, they are fermenting and aging in a combination of 228 and 500 liter French oak, as well as Foudre. A lot of people are doing this these days, especially with Chardonnay, right? Boy, if you haven't been to South Africa, this gives you this hint, looking at this picture, the mountains rise out of nowhere. You know, they were all formed by whatever squish factor happened, you know, billions of years ago. It is so complex in terms of the aspects and the altitudes. This is barrel fermented. They don't claim lees stirring, but it does stay on the lees for 9 months prior to bottling. They're not, you know, bragging about specific methods other than to say that no SO2 or enzymes are added prior to fermentation. What else to tell you about it? Yes, South Africa is a growing region. It's actually essentially Mediterranean with warm, sunny growing seasons, but you've got the very lovely Benguela Current flowing north from Antarctica with enthusiasm to cool the coastal areas. And remember, Southern Hemisphere, further south, cooler climate. The Cape Doctor is a notoriously strong southeasterly wind that does what? It blows across the Western Cape and it inhibits fungal disease. Those strong winds are a best friend, though they can beat up the vines as well. Their most southern, growing region offers the coolest climate in the country, and that's where their sparkling production and their Pinot Noir and Chardonnay production are based. I got to tell you, Evan, it's showing like $1 million,
Yeah,
at
no,
least to me.
it's gorgeous. I was going to say the one thing that just going back there, maybe you could just illustrate a little bit more for all of our listeners out there, is that the texture. There's a richness, there's a density to the wine that sort of pushed me away from Chenin. And if it had pushed me into the Pinot Gris camp in Alsace, it probably would have been incorporated with a riper, more aromatic character of fruit, plus probably some residual sugar. What do you think? And why?
No, I don't disagree with you. And
Yeah.
also a softer mouthfeel. I mean, it's rare that Pinot Gris Grigio, regardless of where it's grown, even in a cool, bracing climate, the acidity is not usually this compelling, this cleansing. Chenin, I think, has specific aromatics that are simply not reflected here. To me, Chenin, especially dry Loire Chenin, is one of the hardest wines to nail, but it inevitably, at least to this nose and palate, will display a stone fruit, you know, apricots, peaches, nectarines, and however you want to define that indefinable Chenin thing that I call wet wool. That because I'm old enough that I washed my then affordable cashmere sweaters myself, that smell. But I think that it actually is mimicking white Burgundy, and that's probably what they intend, both in the minerality, the acidity, the restraint. Very deft use of oak, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I'm just quickly zipping in the chat room. Number one, Oliver, I am decimated that you ended up with the wrong wines. And Silka, who's on with us behind the scenes here today, will contact you, work you, and we'll make sure we get you what you need to get for when you go back and watch the recording later. It'll make some sense to you. And then Bill had a question, Madeleine, that the range from, or comment rather, the range from citrus to tropical said Chardonnay, but he second guessed it to Chenin. Any comments there?
I'm curious, you know, actually, I would just even throw it back at you. Why Chenin? I can fully understand it. I don't think it's a wrong thing to consider at all. You know, this is gently aromatic for Chardonnay, but as I just mentioned a moment ago, it doesn't get enough of the stone fruit for me, which is classic Chenin's classic tag. Or that wet wool character, or something else I get from Chenin mid palate, and this is personal because everything ends up being personal. When you know I hold Chenin mid palate, even when it's Sauvignon, I get an illusion of sweetness. There is a character to the fruit that telegraphs that, and I confuse Chenin with regularity with dry Riesling, you know, which all TDN aside, I don't think it's a bad consideration. Is this a Chardonnay? It has oak influence, but it's very, very subtle.
And then lastly, to close this one up and being conscious of our time. And again, people hold any other questions for the happy half hour afterwards. We can do that. Handsome man there, Mr. Finlayson. Why not Vermentino?
Why not Vermentino? You know, at the risk of sounding like a snob, I think most Vermentino, unless it's A++ and somebody's expensive expression of it, possibly old vine, would have more simplicity to it. I don't think it would have any oak influence. it would have leaves, but I don't think I think the acidity on the Vermentino would scooch closer to Pinot Grigio than it would to, this bracing. Do
Yeah, it
you
wouldn't
agree
be as
with
piercing.
that?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say it wouldn't be as
Mhm.
piercing
Yeah.
as this one is. So very cool. And the wine, it's like, and they say how like winemakers and wines look alike or come alike. This guy looks like the kind of guy who would make that wine. So there you go. Anyway, let's move on to wine number two, and I will take that there. See, you're a great leadoff hitter, Maddie. So
Lead off hitter.
if you were a baseball player, you'd have a very high on base percentage and you'd score a lot of runs because people would push you in, knock you in, and
And
you get
that's a good
scores.
thing.
That's a
Yay.
good thing. All right, moving on to wine number two. You know the drill. Go ahead and hold it up against a white background. And one of the nice things you have the benefit of doing, which you didn't do before, is you could actually look at the color of this wine in comparison to the color of Madeleine's wine. And I would suggest to you that this wine has even a richer, deeper color and sheen, perhaps pushing more of that yellow, almost, I would say brassy is an overstatement, got a deep color there. And as I swirl it around, it seems to have a moderate viscosity. It's tearing, but not super slow. So I'd say it's probably a moderate level of alcohol there. And as I look at the color, Madeleine talked a little bit before of having sort of like an olivey or sort of a greenish sheen to it. And I would say that this one does too, although probably not as much as hers. Let's move into the fun stuff, which is, of course, what it looks like, smells like. Well, we did what it looks like, smells like, and tastes like. And right off the bat, this is a completely different wine than the wine Madeleine has. If Madeleine's wine was powerful, albeit a little bit more complex and elegant in style, this is a very exuberant wine. This wine is a party of a wine in a bottle in the sense that it tells you exactly what it is, what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like eventually there. And it's driven by fruit. So, as my first question goes, how would you describe the fruit character that you have here, and what's it like? So, I would say this fruit is sort of pretty much a two notes to me, really three, but it's a lot of stone fruit right off the bat, and I'm getting peach, getting some nectarine, I'm getting some apricot, although maybe the apricot isn't quite as ripe. I am getting tree fruit on a secondary basis, but much more again of sort of a very ripe pear, Asian pear, cherimoya-ish. I don't know if cherimoya would fit there. Maybe that's a tropical fruit, but
I
I'll
don't know
move to
what it is.
tropical fruit. Custard apples. Custard
Ah,
apples are
thank
really
you.
good. But this does have a slightly mango-ish character, and then it has a little bit of a pineapple character and a bit of guava. That sort of bitterness that you can get from guava in there as well too. So all those things are there. Then next up after the fruit is that floral avalanche, the floral jump out at you. So I'm getting a combination of honeysuckle, I'm getting jasmine, I'm getting gardenia, I'm getting orange blossom, I'm getting boom, boom, boom. Lots of different floral components that are doing nothing more than
Oh.
lifting the fruit up there and making this wine exuberant. I'm getting ginger, like Madeleine said before, but I'm getting almost like candied ginger, like, you know, when you put the sugar on it and just let it
Mm.
sit there and then you put it in your ginger snaps later on. A little bit honeyed, and not anything that suggests oak to me at all. This is a very fairly linear style of wine. There's a lot of that linear stuff going on, a lot of fruit, a lot of floral, etc. But there's no suggestion of oak. Not getting any real sense of place. That is to say, terroir, either inorganic or organic. It really is sort of a fruit thing there. So, are there any important non-fruit aromas? Not so much really. That tells me something as I'm thinking through the wine. And what does the wine structure suggest? Well, we're going to find out. Go ahead and take a nice mouthful of this wine. Feel free to move it around. If you don't feel comfortable slurping it like Madeleine is doing and then having it come out your nose on the other side, which happens to me from time to time, but hold it in your mouth and chew it almost there. This wine has a roundness to it. It has a
Mhm.
texture to it. It's got, I wouldn't call it necessarily viscous, but there's a soft oiliness to the texture of the wine. It is dry, although the fruit is very ripe. And it's important to restate the difference between
Mhm.
dryness and residual sugar. So if a wine isn't perceptively sweet, it is dry. It may be fruit forward, but it is dry. And this wine is very dry. It is long. I can still taste it. It's got an elegance to it. So the nose and aromas are very forward there, but the palate's a little shyer. The volume isn't turned up quite as high, and it's nice. It's not over the top. I thought it might be over the top, and then boom, I went into it, and really pretty, really, really straightforward. So let's talk about where we could be here and what grape we could be here, because clearly, think back to our Chardonnay that we just had before. Our choices are here. So we have Chardonnay. Ask yourself, is this Chardonnay like the way the first one was? Is it not? Or is that just like an optical illusion and we're obfuscating you? Could it be Riesling? We know Rieslings from the Pacific Northwest. We know them from Germany, etc. They tend to be fairly racy in their acidity, not necessarily fleshy, etc. And then we have Viognier. And Viognier, as we know, is the grape originating in the Northern Rhone Valley, which has found itself as a very happy expat all over the world, tends to be a bit more fruit forward, exuberant, etc. And then if there's another grape that you'd like to talk about, throw it in the other. And then, of course, within the European choices, we have France and Germany, and the non-European choices, we have Australia and California. Pretty much, with the exception of Viognier in Germany, you can find all of those grapes in all of those places. So with that, if you haven't voted already, get ready. You have to vote like for real if you haven't already mailed in your ballot in a week or two. So you want to
I
get
show
ready.
up in person. I'm the expat that likes to go there.
You like to do that? Okay. But I tend to be the early voter, so I already sent my ballot in there. But if you haven't voted already, vote, and I'm going to close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see where we ended up. The poll is closed, and wow, with a whopping 94%. Viognier was up there. Chardonnay, Chardonnays generally, even from places that are known for more tropical styles. I'm thinking like the Santa Lucia Highlands of California or parts of the Russian River, a little bit more interior and away from the coast. You can get that, but it's not quite that exuberant there. Texturally, both Viognier and Chardonnay can have richness to it. What's interesting here is when we go to the geography that we're kind of all over the place. It's literally like almost a split between France and the other places. Obviously, Germany would have been for our friends in the land of other grapes and stuff like that. So it looks like the old world, if you add up 31 and 19, that's 50, 44 in France. So we're kind of 50-50, and we'll talk through that as we learn a little bit more from the wines. So 94% is a strong statement. And as we get in our plane, well, maybe that'll give it away. Depends how short or long the flight is, right? Because if it's a long flight and it's old world, we're going to be on this plane for a bit. We're starting out in South Africa. We're leaving our friends over in the coastal region, getting up on our plane, taking some altitude. And I guess the first question, probably the most important question, is what hemisphere are we going to stay in? We're down in the far reaches of the south. And so far, it doesn't look like our airplane is finding its way northward. It looks like it's moving due east, but it's not taking a heavy north trajectory. Why? Because it's going to Australia, and specifically South Australia, and specifically to our friends at Yalumba Winery. Yalumba Winery is an awesome winery making awesome wines across multiple price tiers. And Yalumba for me is a go-to winery in Australia, both for the variety, Viognier, I'll spoiler alert it there that we're having, but also for things like Shiraz and other grape varieties that they do as well. So you can see here that we are technically in the Barossa and Eden. Those are the areas that they focus on. They focus on the Eden Valley mostly for their whites and the Barossa for their Shiraz, but Yalumba is a dead-on straight forward, fantastic winery. This particular wine that we're going to be going through momentarily as I take you through it is the Y series. They make 4 different Viogniers at Yalumba, and the Y series is probably what I consider their entry level. But I will tell you, I have never had, Madeline, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've never had a $17 Viognier from anywhere else in the world that maintains such great Viognier complexity, that holds its shape, that isn't tastes like Walgreens Princess soap with residual sugar, and just is everything about it. This wine has a Condria-like character to it. So all the people that went Rhone, went France, you're not wrong.
You're simply giving Yalumba and their chief winemaker that I understand just retired, Louisa Rose, your hat tipping, because I got to tell you, this wine defines the word value in its best sense.
Absolutely.
There's nothing lesser about it.
Very much so. Yalumba is owned by the Hill Smith family, and they are 6 generations in now. They own not only Yalumba, but they own Yance sparkling wines. They own Pusey Vale, another winery that is known for incredible Rieslings, etc. They own Hedges, they own Dalrymple, they own a couple of others. They're a very important family in Australia. Yalumba dates back to 1849 and has had 170 plus years now of contiguous winemaking. So it never stopped, got sold, or whatever. Louisa, or Lou as we like to call her, is literally considered the queen of Viognier. She planted and produced the first Viogniers in Australia back in the 1980s. I believe 84 was her first vintage there. And she did retire. Sam Wigan is sort of the winemaker there, although she's never going to retire. We were talking offline. I'm sure she's still there at all the blending sessions, deciding which wines go into the various different tiers, etc., and still sits as a great ambassador for the country. This wine comes from multiple vineyards, primarily, obviously, a lot of their estate stuff, probably younger vine and lots that don't make the quote unquote bigger wines, and then is augmented by fruit throughout South Australia. But she's very particular about her Viognier, as all Queens of Viognier should be. Wild ferment, which I would always be a little scared of in a grape like Viognier because it could take it to the wild side. Stainless steel, 4 days of cold soak, which gives you the really in-your-face forward fruit, but also the darker color. Once again, you're going to pull some pigmentation out of the skins when you cold soak it for 4 days. I would also suggest to you that when you do longer skin contact, and this is longer skin contact, this is a wine that's going to be made for current consumption. So this is a 21. It is at its apogee right now. I'd hold on to it for probably maybe another 12 to 18 months and then make sure I'd
It's
finished
not tasting
everything I
or
was
smelling tired though.
No, not at
Not at
all, not
all.
at all. But which is again, and this, as they would tell you in Condrieu and in the Northern Rhone, people for whatever reason feel like the wine should be drunk immediately, and the good ones really do age relatively modestly all the way up to the top of the class there. So a lovely job by a lovely winemaker, etc. Question between California, Australian, and other
Wood.
vignettes. Yeah. So New World Viognier, or so-called non-European Viognier, is going to be a little bit more fruit forward. I would say it's harder to distinguish terroir or place in this wine. If anything, it depends on the style and the interpretation and the intent. So the relative fruit profiles are going to be similar. In the States, they tend to be perhaps even more quote unquote fruit forward in the sense that they can be really peachy, really nectarine, etc. And it says it's Sauvignon Blanc. That
Well, this is
suggests
the person who has a problem with the kit.
the kit. Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Mhm.
But generally California and even Virginia options, Horton Winery, tend to be a little bit more voluptuous, tend to be a little bit higher alcohol, tend to be a little bit more generous, and tend, unless they take their foot off the accelerator, to be a bit more syrupy in nature, and is one of the reasons why Viognier can be a very polarizing wine. This is a superb example, and one that you should hold on to here. And if you like this one, take a step upstairs to their Eden Valley Vineyard one, or take a step upstairs to, what's the other one called? Vergelus or whatever, the very top end wine that they make.
Virgilius, and I think they
Virgilius.
have one called Signature, but I think Virgilius is its top. But I'll tell you, if you want to memorize varietal character, all things aside, and if you're having a lucky day and have the money, or somebody's got the money to give you Condrieu, you can't do better than Yalumba's Viognier, any of them.
Absolutely.
And what's totally cool, Yalumba's family owned and operated, and Louisa is not a member of the family, but they've trusted her for what, going on
Over 20 years.
Yeah.
Well
So
over 20.
great example of ability to grasp varietal recognition on this terpenic
Yeah.
grape variety. Its family
That's a good,
includes
cool world for you to throw when you get these really fruit forward, perfumed Gewürzi, Rieslingy, Torrentesi, Muscati,
Muscat,
etc.
right.
Those are what they call terpenic varieties. So now you can impress your friends. Anyway, with that, let's move on to wine
Ready,
3.
wine. I have slightly too much in my glass. I'm going to dump a little, try not to make a mess. And then I've got wine number 3. So this is where color gets really interesting, because the center, the color overall is a true ruby red. And by the way, questions to consider. What does color tell you? Color isn't just a phone in, slam through it, ignore, blah, blah, blah. It tells a story. You just don't make your conclusions based on the color, at least not up front when you're desperate to know what it is. We're going to quantify the alcohol because that can be personal, and it's good to know how you are in terms of perceiving structural components like alcohol. Do you tend to go high? Do you tend to go low? And then qualifying the fruit, ripe, underripe, or overripe. So let's go back to the color, gorgeous ruby red. I wouldn't call it brilliant. They maybe have not polished it as much as they could have, which is not a sin. You know, it's undoubtedly intentional. I can see my finger through it. I can, if I squint, read through it. So probably not a small, thick-skinned blue-black variety. Simple, right? Very interesting. If you let your eye move from the center to the very rim, the hue stays kind of the same, though it lightens. Though in my light, the very rim has like a whisper, a suggestion of yellow in it, which could simply mean that it's starting its trajectory of vinosity. It's probably not there yet, but hold the thought. Very different way this wine whirls in the glass. There's a heaviness to it that is telegraphing probably more alcohol and or extract. Is there any staining of the tears? No, not in my glass. Aromatically, it is a bouquet of ripe, verging on overripe red fruit to me. A little bit of black, but dominantly red. And we're talking red plum, red currant, super ripe cherries, Michigander here, right? Maybe a little bit of tartness, but I think that will incarnate on the palate more than on the nose. So I'm not smelling the whole sour cherry pomegranate category. The condition is fresh and ripe, verging on overripe. I don't think it's moved into jammy cooked land. And I'm going to call on Evan a little later to give for him to give me his impressions as well. By the way, every time I approach a wine, it's the first time I've tasted it. I'm not pulling forward any impressions from past tastings. It's like meeting people. I give them the benefit of whatever's happening in front of me at this moment. And it's always positive. So citrus fruit is moving into orange land, orange, mandarin, orange peel. Really attractive. A little bit of florality, though it's not dominant, like maybe jasmine-like. In terms of veggies or herbs, there's an organic earth character that is telegraphing, hi, I just picked a mushroom and I can't wait to, cook it. The herbs are, the Greek will tell you, really good oregano, maybe a little bitter chicory. Other aspects, red licorice, and maybe a little paprika. It's a great nose. Turn dirt, potting soil. Is there a minerality? I'm interested to see if it's going to turn up on the palate, but on the nose, it's organic earth. And I love Akeem is making some descriptions about strawberries, not dried, but dehydrated. Boy, that is specific. A little bit of leather, little animal. Let's take it on the palate, but it's complex, very attractive. And I can smell the alcohol. This ain't like, 12 and a half. Let's go ahead and taste it. The attack is delicious. There's all that red fruit. Black does come forward. Whoa. It actually has significant amounts of tannin. It's surprising me a bit. Sometimes you look at a tender color and you don't expect it when it kicks in. So I'm going to take another sip. Very interesting. The acidity is not deficient. If I look through the tannin, which is drying, but I would characterize it as not super fine sandpaper nor coarse, sort of medium grained. I can taste the wine through it. The alcohol is present. I don't put numbers on it, but I would characterize it to me as medium plus plus. It's giving the wine weight. This is not a character flaw. And it's giving it some heft. The herbs on the palate are definitely dried. There is kind of a garigi character to the herbs, and I am not leading you, where. I'm just saying dried herbs. There is a peppery component, and take your pick. whether it's green peppercorn, black peppercorn, or just white pepper. It depends on, I think, how sensitive you are to that characteristic. There's an intense fruitiness to this wine that speaks maybe some whole cluster, just saying. I'm not great at picking that out, but I think I'm right about this. And overview wise, on the palate, there is a granitic, schisty, inorganic mineral component, far more prominent on the palate, whereas on the nose, it was that mulchy potting soil characteristic. Complex, rich, red fruit driven, ripe red fruit driven with some dried aspects to it. Plenty of complexity. The oak factor is neutral. It's in there, but it's definitely not driving this wine at all, nor is it distracting. High quality, complex.
Yeah, it's interesting though, and I like your comment about the tannins, and I think the tannins are exacerbated by the minerality in this case of the wine, because yeah, I mean, it's almost like they're lifting them up there, because I think the tannins are appropriate for, well, I know what the wine is, but
what it is
for the style, but I think that they're more pronounced than what you would expect simply by quote unquote knowing what it is. So I think that's an interesting observation and comment. So cool. Well, what options do we have here, Madeline?
Needs a lamb chop, says the vegan vegetarian, right? We've got Dolcetto, we've got Malbec, which could be a blend, and we've got Grenache aka Garnacha, that could be a blend. We do that because it's important for you to ask yourself, is this a blend or a monovarietal? Not a bad thing, especially if you get tied in a little knot. And what separates those? Dolcetto is famous for higher tannin and lower acidity, whereas Barbera does the opposite. And people always think Dolcetto's like a little fluffy thing, but boy, it can be pretty serious in the right hands. Malbec to me is usually, not always, but if it's grown at 3,000 feet above sea level, and it's got some ambition behind it, tends to have a marked floral element. And I didn't mention flowers in this wine. It's got it. Oh, I did say jasmine. But it's a light touch. Could be Malbec. It doesn't have pronounced florality. And the tannins are often quite the same as this. It also tends to be opaque in color if it's ambitious Argentine Malbec. Grenache, depending on where it's grown, it's very much a reflection of whether it's got other grape varieties in it, and or are you Southern Rhone? Are you Australia? Barossa, not Barossa. I was told old vine Grenache that will live with cockroaches and nobody else. If there was ever, some cataclysmic thing, that's what the Aussies say. So in terms of how they look, Dolcetto and Grenache, well, Grenache is going to be the thinner skinned of the three, Malbec, the thicker skinned of the three. Dolcetto is never blended that I know of, or they don't admit to it. And we've got Italy and Spain for Europe, Argentina and Australia for not Europe, aka I still say New World.
That's fine. And there's no problem with that.
Oh, yay. Please vote with enthusiasm. We have someone being very straightforward about their deduction. Chianti Classico. I love it when you have the courage of your convictions. Yay. And something I will immediately say with no spoiler alert, keep voting, is that what this wine absolutely has, that Chianti has, is that beautiful balance between acidity and tannin. It's one of my favorite things about Sangiovese. I belong to a tasting group, and that's what we're going to do on Monday. Montalcino, Montepulciano, and Chianti. Not older than 20 years. So let's see.
So how's where did we end up? Yeah, we should be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1-ing it, and seeing where we end up. Ooh. So look at that.
Dolcetto has a healthy 20%. Malbec, a little more restrained at 6%. Other, please don't forget to tell us what you think the other is. I find it wildly. Oh, Chianti Classico. Thank you, Akim, because Sangiovese is not up there. So we've got Italy, Spain for the obvious, and Argentina. And you know what I just noticed? And I wrote this poll, and my bad. I probably should have included France in there for Grenache, right? So let's take our trip and
maybe there's a reason though, when you take your trip that you're going
Maybe
to
there's
find
a.
out because of, and it's an interesting observation that when we think of Grenache, we think of it as Grenache and we
Mhm.
think of it as a grape from a certain country, which actually is not the origins of the grape. And there's
No,
so
the
many
French
grape,
think it is.
the French think it is, but the grape
Mhm.
itself, while not far away from there, didn't actually originate there, nor did some other grapes that came from that same part of, oh, I'll be a spoiler alert, Iberia that we talked about before that everyone just assumed were French.
You want to talk about continental? This is smack dab in the middle of Spain, somewhat to the west of Madrid, from an appellation I could find nowhere. But
Nor could
it,
I.
right, but it is spelled Cebrebos, and they phoneticize it on their website, these producers, and they pronounce it Febrero, Febrero. So a little lisp going on there. This is an area that, and the larger, encompassing appellation is Castilla Leon, but this area, especially west of Madrid, where a lot of innovative winemaking is taking place. This particular producer is actually famous for another grape variety, Bobal, which is, by the way, the second most widely planted grape in Spain. Who knew? After Tempranillo, this is Garnacha, aka the origins of Grenache, and it's the third most widely planted red grape in Spain. It is 100, no, it's almost 100% Grenache. They're saying that there might be a little bit of Albillo Real in there, a grape variety I'm not that familiar with.
It's a white grape.
Well, Albillo,
There you
that's
go.
right.
Maybe co-fermented. I just wanted to point out, Madeline, sorry for interrupting, that
Mhm,
Sierra de Gredos, where it
mhm,
is in that state, if you remember, go back to, actually, can we go back to the picture just before that? You'll
mhm,
see the mountain range behind there to the west. And
mhm.
this literally comes from higher altitudes. And not only just higher altitude being in the Meseta, but slightly higher altitude on the foothills of that mountain range.
And there
So,
is a little river going there.
yeah.
So we are in a river valley, and they are not kidding about the altitude. They're soaring above 2,200 feet above sea level, where, Argentina starts talking about altitude at over 2,000 feet, right?
Yeah.
So what you've got is dry farm, organic viticulture, primarily granitic soil, some sand, significantly high altitude. Remember that, dry farming was the way of the land, the rule, actually, until within recent memory, when it was permissible to irrigate, which is, didn't happen until, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but probably 20 years ago,
Well,
maybe
yeah, I was going to say
something
it
like
comes
that.
hand in hand with the climate change because now, we
Mhm.
never think about it. But aside from the fact that A, if you have young vines and you don't water them, they die. And
Mhm.
B, if you have older vines too, obviously the oldest vines are the most capable of struggling. But even then, they need water too. So you can, at least in France, you can actually petition to irrigate once a certain date has passed and they say the conditions are there. And I don't know anybody who's ever been turned down before, although the context of irrigation is not something that we think about. And a lot of people who do dry farm and have the skill set and the ability to dry farm will tell you that irrigating sucks. You shouldn't do it. And they think about it purely in the sense of plumping up your grapes before harvest. But
Mhm.
oftentimes it's for survival.
What you've got too at this altitude, you have acidity preserved, not just by diurnal swings, which are significant, but this is continental. What does that translate to? Blazing summers and really cold winters. You've got one of the coldest growing regions or coolest growing regions in Spain for Garnacha. In terms of their winemaking technique, we're back to the, combo O containers, concrete tanks, earthenware vats, neutral 500-liter French oak puncheons. Hello, Aurelio Garcia, the winemaker. It is 20% whole cluster macerations. So there's a whole cluster element in there. What else to tell you of interest? I think it's a wonderful expression of old vine. These vines were planted in like the 30s, give or take. Mountainous, multiple tiny sites. We're talking a hectare each, in an area that is so obscure we had a hard time finding it. But I find wines like this so interesting because even if you don't have an intellectual frame of reference, how cool is it to be able to assess and recognize the quality, both, you know, the earthy and the inorganic minerality sings through on this non-intervention winemaking. Pretty neat wine. Thank you for picking it out, Evan.
Yeah, fun wine, and showing you again Garnacha, a Spanish grape,
Mhm.
much like Cariñena, a Spanish grape, right? Much like Mataro or Monastrell, a Spanish grape that went to France. But a lovely effort, the more savory side of what it is. And I think Madeline correctly pointed out the higher altitude, the long diurnal exchange, and the clearly more poor soils give this wine an intensity and a vigor and a verve that a lot of people think of Grenache or as being kind of like fat, flabby, confected. And this one is cooler climate. There's that herbal nature there. There's the structure and all that, and even some tannin because the phenolics are not quite as developed, although certainly from an alcohol standpoint, it's right. All right, let's
You're
move
gonna
on.
have to put your pedal to the metal because
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna move through this
yeah,
one because we talked a
we've
lot
been
about that one.
tiptoeing.
There you go. So take a quick look. I'm not even gonna walk through the questions there, but take a quick look at that red, blue, or black fruit. Any non-fruit aromas that are important here, and texture and quality of tannins. Three things to think about. So give it a quick look right off the bat. It's very relatively see-through, somewhat translucent. The color I would say is between light and medium. I'm going to characterize mine here as being lighter colored because I can read everything through it. It's a very light ruby, slightly pink towards the rim. And as I swirl it, it's got a fairly quick viscosity, so it doesn't come off, at least in the appearance, in my clean glass, as having a lot of weight there. So it's hard to know. And yeah, let's move on. Aromas here. Once again, this is great. Go back and smell the last wine, wine three, and you really get a strong sense of earthiness and minerality and all that. And then this wine here is once again going back to my wine too. Why is it I'm getting all the fruit bombs today, Madeline? This wine is definitely more lifted and more perfumed and aromatic in its fruit profile. I would say it is predominantly red fruited, which always suggests cooler climate, thinner skin grape. And here I would say it's a range of cherries from sort of slightly unripe Bing cherries to those Montmorency sour cherries, etc. There's some red plum. There's a little bit of red currant, a little bit of currant leaf. It is fresh, it is ripe, and it is very juicy by nature. I would say that the fruit character there that is not, there's nothing blue about it, but what's black there is tart. So black raspberry, blackberry, some black cherries that are not 100% ripe, and again, a little bit of black plum that's probably not 1000% ripe. It is a crunchy wine in terms of the fruit character as it pronounces in the nose. Orange peel, orange zest a little bit there. Florals, probably violets, a little bit of, again, jasmine, and just a kiss of rose petal in there. And the one thing I want you to think about moving forward, all of you, is I just walked through a couple of weeks ago. We had some late blooming roses in our rose garden in here at Golden Gate Park, and not all roses smell the same. A lot of them have, by the way, no smell. And the ones that do range dramatically from the sort of very heady English sort of style, those David Austin roses, to those that are a little bit more aromatic, some that are almost cinnamony in nature. So use rose judiciously, kind of like using the word brick to describe a descriptor there. It's a little bit licoricy, it's a little bit oregano-y, it's a little bit of tea leafy. The tea leaf being somewhere between kind of, I don't know, oolong-esque and maybe a little bit of that orange constant comment thing. It's a bit of sassafras, or as they would like to tell you down in NOLA, filet, like filet powder there, and a soft nuttiness, something that's almost like just some maybe pistachio or something like that. Not heavy-handed, not super oaky, but there, a little bit of, again, probably some whole cluster, some lift on that fruit, some partially semi-carbonic, crunchy, maybe a little bit more cranberry, and in the mouth, it is intense, it is shrill, it is bright. It has moderate ABV, which again was suggested to me by the sort of quick viscosity of the tearing and the legging. Moderate plus tannins, so there's a little bit of a pull here, but they're very well managed. And on length, the wine still comes off to me as being on the young side. It hasn't quite fleshed out yet, and I feel in my gut, I feel in my soul, over time this wine's going to pick up some weight and pick up some body. And right now, it is really just about this sort of almost electric, vibrant red fruit character, but complex. There's a lot going on there at the same time. And even though it may not show as many layers of different herbal things and personalities and stuff like that, like the wine we had before, it serves its purpose well, which we'll talk about when we get there. So delightful little wine. And let's take a look at what we could be. We have Gamay, in this case, Gamay Noir, the grape that you would find in Beaujolais and parts of Oregon, I might add, even parts of California. Gamay, I actually should change that. Although it's mostly pure, you can blend it, most notably with Pinot Noir to make Passe du Grain. We have Grenache as a blend, blended with wine or pure. Pinot Noir, rarely blended with anything except in Champagne, right? A little Chardonnay, a little bit of Meunier. And then we have France and Italy for our European choices. And again, France covering off on all of those. Grenache finds itself in certain places in Italy, as does Pinot Noir. New Zealand and Oregon being our non-European choices. So think about that and think about voting. And there's a lot of stuff that the Pinot and the Gamay share in common, which is sort of a brightness and sharpness of acidity levels. They're both earlier ripening varieties. Grenache 2 is going to be a later ripening variety, and you're going to get a different genre of dare I say tannins, although none of the tannins in any of those three varieties, when well managed, are hard. Probably the biggest spoiler factor there would be if one is having a Grenache and it's blended with other varieties, and they put a lot of Syrah in there, well, that's going to change your tannin profile. So let's go ahead and finish our voting. Vote early, vote often, and don't vote too often. I guess they're trying to prevent people from voting too often, right, in this upcoming week or two. So vote, just vote once, but make sure your vote counts. So with that, let us hop back on our plane. Let us leave the confines of España and Iberia. But first, let's figure out what we've got, Evan. Well, it looks like most people are leaning towards Pinot Noir land. And I would tell you that that's not a bad call, because Gamay, although it's going to give you a lot of the same crunchy red fruit characters and all that, tends to not be quite as austere unless you are truly vinifying it like Pinot Noir, like you would be doing, say, in Cru Beaujolais in the north. But Pinot is going to give you that sort of really lovely, fresh, bright, crunchy character to it. As
New
far
Zealand
as,
versus Oregon, Evan, what's the
yeah, New Zealand
punchline
versus
there?
Oregon. I think that Oregon is sort of the tweener between California and Burgundy, whereas New Zealand tends to be a little bit closer to Burgundy by nature, especially if you're on the South Island in places like Otago. So we're gonna get on our plane here. We're going to leave our friends in Cerebros. Is that how you said you? Cebreros,
Cebreros.
near Madrid,
No,
and we're going
Cebreros.
Cerebros. Okay, and we're going to leave them. We're going to leave Iberia altogether. We're going to leave the continent, if you will. We're going to leave the European part of the world. We're going to stay north. I'm going to keep you there, but I'm going to bring you back to California. So those of you who went to New Zealand are probably all going, and we're going to go to Oregon, and we're going to go to the Willamette Valley, and we're going to go to a wonderful little producer that does a lovely job and has been doing it for a while. And these are the folks at Winderly. Now, Winderly is a winery that's been around for a long time, but it's still new to a lot of people. And I have to say, I'd only had it a couple times, but I tasted this particular wine and thought to myself, this is a really cool thing. So Winderly sits in the Willamette. The Willamette itself was only an AVA since '84. I think we forget and just assume it's been around with us forever, but it's a relatively recent appellation, and all the subzone in the Willamette that you can see on the map on the right that all sit north of that word Willamette Valley have all been brought in even more recently than that. And back in the day, there were a handful of wineries there. It reminds me back of Napa in the day, and half of them started with A, like Adelsheim and Amity and Arterbury and all that. But you had like Dick Erath and Dick Ponzi. You had the A's and the D's, I guess, back then. Sokol Bloss or another. But Bill Sweat and his wife Donna Morris started this winery, Winderly, back in 2006. Although they'd been traveling back and forth since the '90s. To the area. They're Bostonians by birthright and by accent, I would add. And they fell in love, bought a vineyard that they have 43 acres today, but their original vineyard, which I believe is 20 something acres, called at the time the Willamette Valley Vineyard or whatever, something like that. But they renamed it the Winderly Vineyard. So it's their home vineyard now. And Winderly is a made up word. It's literally wind and lee being sort of a term used to describe a pasture or a terrain. And this, along with their Warden Hill vineyard, form the core of what they do, although they make about 8 or 9 different Pinot Noirs and do vineyard designate other people's stuff. And this particular cuvee that you're having, the Winderly Bounteous cuvee, is a blend, a plot blend between 10% of the Winderly vineyard itself. And this has got vines in it that go back 50 years in them. So older, not necessarily something we always associate with Pinot Noir, but old Pinot Noir vines are capable of producing awesome fruit. And then 90% from the Warden Hill vineyard. It's a series of different clones and selections, mostly Dijon, with a little bit of Pommard and 1 or 2 other clones in it, a little bit of whole cluster, a larger wood, and some used oak barrels, and making up just this really interesting, beautiful wine. And I think they show off everything about what Dundee is. And Dundee to me is a lot about structure and a lot about its acidity and all that. And again, that sort of beautiful purity of red and slightly underripe black fruit. And again, this is a cuvee. It's sort of their village wine, if you will, as opposed to a single vineyard designate. So just a lovely wine. I don't know if you have anything to add on, Maddie, before we move to your next one.
No, I think you were comprehensive. The only thing I would say is that it's got a little bit of black fruit in it. And I think this is an example of why we use that, time-honored phrase, which is evident in this class, that it's a bridge, that Oregon Pinot can be a bridge to Burgundy.
Yeah.
It definitely is rooted in the earth, and it's a really, really nice wine. Structurally, also, I think Oregon Pinots, when they're ambitious, meaning, not meant to be consumed yesterday, they need bottle age and can handle it. No problem. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think they oftentimes don't come into their own until they've had 3 or 4 years of bottle age, post those couple of years of barrel and stuff pre-release. I didn't mean to take away from Emily. Emily is the day-to-day winemaker, although our friend Mr. Sweat does consider himself still to be quote unquote winemaker. But I think that Emily probably made this wine more. And if he's been doing it as long as he says he has, he's probably entering more of an emeritus role. So we'll give Emily the cred for making this wine, because I bet she did.
I love all the emeritus winemakers. We were making a very affectionate, respectful joke before we got on, that if you read about Paul Draper, time-honored gent responsible for Ridge through decades, he is retired, lives on the property, and shows up at every blending session. And guess who gets listened to,
Absolutely. All right, onwards to 5.
Okie dokie. And now for something completely different visually. This is where, turning the glass slowly, it is staining the glass. The center is truly opaque. I can't see a damn thing. And it is the darkest ruby, lightening up to, really within a 1/4 inch of the rim or less. It lightens up a little. And I would call that, ruby with violet or purple in it. So it's telegraphing youth. It's also telegraphing grape or grapes that have thicker skin and more extract. I always loved how people would get angry at Pinot Noir because it didn't look like this. Well, if you put a chunk of Petite Sirah in it, it will maybe look like that. We've been talking about red, blue, and black fruit attributes. So, just try to get your head on in terms of whether it's singular or a combo. Blue fruit tends to incarnate less than the other two. So you might want to march and get some blueberry jam or make some to remind yourself of that aromatic. Earthiness we've been talking about, and it's really come into play with regularity, even on the New World wines today, with the exception of the Viognier that was, really fruit forward. And I'm asking you specifically, what are the 2 or 3 dominant non-fruit aromas in this wine? Because it really speaks to the grape variety and the provenance. So it's got some heft in terms of how it moves in the glass, and the slow velocity in terms of how the tears form aromatically. Oh God, what beautiful, beautiful fruit. I did cheat and taste this wine earlier because I was intrigued by it, and we're getting sage and thyme. So immediately herbs are showing up. The purity of the fruit to me is, super ripe strawberry. And if a strawberry could be black, like a black strawberry and a wild black strawberry, gorgeous. Red plum, some black fruit, also really black cherry, perfectly ripe. This to me, if I want to qualify ripeness, is exactly on the edge of, it hasn't flipped into overripe at all. I actually don't smell alcohol. Gorgeous florality on this wine. That's, violets and lavender. All y'all like lavender. I get it dried and like to remind myself of the smell. There's a bitterness on the back end of the smell, and I'm curious if it's going to show up on the palate. That's like dark greens, arugula, black olives, the salinity, maybe a little bit of fennel anise. And let's go back to whoever said sage and thyme. This has, again, not unlike wine number 3, a garrigue smell. It's both, combo dried herbs, Provençal, bay leaf to me, and a little bit of pepper in this. It's not flamboyant, but it's distinct. Rocky minerality. If there is oak, it's definitely a, back player. I love the smell of this wine. There could be some whole cluster in this as well. This is the type of wine I could just sit here and forget to taste, but I'll taste it, Evan. Here we go. Don't forget mid palate. I don't mind going silent for a moment because I'm really paying very close attention to mid palate when I hold it. And that's when I personally get a lot of secondary characteristics on wine. There is a subtle but perceptible meaty quality to this wine. One of our friends, Michelle DeHaze, likes to call it the Jimmy Dean character. But a little bit like sausage or something in that vein, cured meat, dried meat, but subtle, charcuterie. It's not strong, it's a player though, but it's enveloped in this perfectly ripe fruit. In terms of reflection of the nose, the salinity is there. Black olives for sure. There's a sweetness actually to the fruit that also has to do with, to me, red beets, like a little bit of the sweetness of cooked beets. What am I forgetting to talk about? There is both dried and fresh herbs to this wine. I get a minty quality to it. I mentioned the flowers, and I would say they're a combination of dried and fresh, both fresh lavender and dried lavender. I'm going to take one more sip because I'm greedy and I want to swallow it.
And maybe address, do you get any sense of oak on this wine, Madeline? Any wood that we should talk about?
Used, maybe some, maybe, because there's so much spice on this wine in terms of the peppercorn, it's not oak spice to me. It's not the Starbucks character. It's not vanilla and sweet baking spices. But I don't think I don't think oak is absent. I think it's probably older barrels, but not necessarily huge barrels. I think maybe used barrique, used 500 or 600 liter. That's what a lot of people are playing with these days. So, to pull back for a second, impeccably ripe fruit. Oh, I didn't even talk about the earthiness. My bad. On the nose, the rocky minerality for sure. But there is a little bit of kind of a florist floor aspect to this wine. I just think inorganic rules here. Perfectly ripe fruit, a combination of red and black, dried and fresh florality, bitter greens, a salinity from an olive character, the specific smell of fennel, a little bit of pepper, more white pepper than black, I think. It is a complex wine that is young, showy, and in just hearing me describe it, I bet money that you could name the variety.
All right.
You're doing very well as a group, by the way, today.
Yes, they are.
Deciding on nailing varietals. A ferrous note, is that iron? I'll let you address that, Evan. I'm not really sure.
No, I think there's definitely a strong inorganic earth note to it. My question would be, if it's, is it, I'm getting more sort of the sort of verve of something more granitic or limey than I
Mhm.
am something ferrous. Ferrous has a deeper, denser sort of character like you find in Coonawarra and you find in Terra Rossa in general, but there's definitely a very strong element of inorganic minerality to this wine.
And to Bill's comment, maybe lead pencil, but that's, tied in with inorganic minerality.
Yeah,
Chocolate, if
exactly.
it is chocolate, it's bitter, dark chocolate. It's not chocolate, oat
85 to
chocolate,
90% cacao content
cacao
chocolate.
content. Syrah blend, Sangiovese blend, Carmenere blend, right? So let's start with Carmenere that will have an exuberant pyrazinic quality to it, though extremely well integrated these days. Evan has turned me on to the quality of Carmenere, specifically from Chile.
Mhm.
Sangiovese, that beautiful tension between acid and tannin, which this wine has actually. Acidity to me is medium plus here. Tannin is medium plus, but fine grained. Either that or my palate's getting used to tannin, and that happens halfway through a tasting. And I would say that Sangiovese tends to have dominantly dried fruit, or a combo of fresh and dried. Syrah or Syrah blend, certainly, elements of pepper, elements of meat, and especially the pepper can be mirrored in Grenache, with which it's often blended. So Italy, France for Sangiovese, Syrah, California, Chile for Syrah and Carmenere.
Mhm.
Nobody's
That's true.
shy anymore. And black pudding, Michael, Labriola, I love that. So you took
That's a
me
great comment.
to a new complex level, says the vegan vegetarian. I will not taste black pudding. Not
There you
gonna do
go.
it.
Or boudin, right? You're not a big
Yeah, I'm
boudin
not gonna
girl
do
either,
it.
I don't think, right?
As much I'll taste, Evan will tell you,
Yeah,
especially if
absolutely.
it's a lamb chop, which a Greek will tell you
Is
is
a
a
vegetable.
vegetable. Yes.
That's like chicken being a vegetable in
Yes.
Argentina if you tell them you're vegetarian and you don't want
Mhm.
to eat steak. Poll is ending now. Three, two, one. And what do we got here?
Ooh, a Syrah.
Predominant.
Sangiovese Carmenere. Those of you who voted for Syrah in the chat room, will you opine on whether you think it's 100% varietal or it has significant amounts of something else? So Italy, France, we're definitely in Europe. We have no other votes. I think this is a really honest forthcoming group, Evan, don't you? Ooh, a
Very
little
much so.
Viognier, says Jerry.
That might be blended with your Syrah,
Mhm.
steering himself towards an area of
I
Côte
swallowed
Rôtie or
it
something.
again.
All
I'm
right.
not supposed to do that. It's, probably verging on unprofessional, but I'm just walking downstairs to eat some soup later.
All right, here we
So
go.
Bill is thinking Northern Rhone, Syrah blend, possibly Côte Rôtie from Jerry.
All right.
I'm still sleeping in my aisle seat in business class. Everyone's,
Watching movies or
yes,
passed
or
out.
yes. What happens in MTW stays in
Stays at
MTW.
MTW.
Marshall's saying 100%. Sarah is saying Saint Joseph.
Calling it.
Sarah is right. I mean, when you nail it, you nail it, and I'm going to call it. This is a Saint Joseph. It is this particular cuvee is 100% Syrah. It is from a wonderful producer. We're in the Northern Rhone. We are in the largest appellation that is 30 miles long. That's significant. That's like almost as long as Burgundy. I'm going to
Mhm.
let Evan jump in momentarily because he was just there. I was supposed to go on this trip. I got COVID, prior to getting on the plane. Gotta love it. This is a wonderful producer, and let's look at the label because there's a fine point here that requires just explanation. This is a producer you may be familiar with as Chateau Saint Côme, or just Saint Côme. This is Louis Baruol, who has started his a négoce project along with his estate grapes coming dominantly from Gigondas, and we can look at the label. So this is a Southern Rhone producer, really famous for the quality of his Gigondas. His family has owned this property for, since what, the 1500s, something absurd like that. But Louis took it over in recent memory, almost immediately transitioned to biodynamic viticulture, and it's in the glass. So when you see Saint Côme, right, as opposed to Chateau Saint Côme, this is his Négoce label, which simply means, I mean, let's not make it cold-blooded. He's buying grapes from, yeah, and on the peel and reveal, it says Chateau. So just
I screwed up, sorry.
well, you know, if this is your idea of a demerit, Evan, we're doing really well, you know. I have much flashier demerits than that. You know, Louis is buying contracted grapes from farmers who are his friends and to whom he's dictating farming techniques, including biodynamic and organic viticulture. This is, to me, a wine worth memorizing in terms of the purity of Syrah, and I think Marshall also called it 100%. And it is from a local variety that Evan is totally hip to, as he was just there and was news to me. It is Serine, S-E-R-I-N-E, an ancient and local variety of Syrah that is more oval in shape. So Prunello Gentile, but in the northern part of the Saint-Joseph, that's pushing up towards Condrieu, and this is the vineyard site, or commune, I guess you would say. This is for Teco information, 70% destem, 30 whole cluster, native yeast, 228 liters, but 20% new. So there's more new oak than I picked up, which speaks to the quality of the fruit for me. This is a cooler subregion of Saint-Joseph. So you can feel it in mouth-watering acidity. The combination of finely grained tannins and mouth-watering acidity is spectacular, but it's got pepper. It's got a little bit of, you know, okay, I'll say sanguine, right? To the blood sausage thing. It's got plenty of dried herbs. It's got a ferality. It's savory, really good Syrah. And I'm going to leave you a full flush 10 minutes to do wine. And
I might abuse it and take an extra 5 into the next thing, but just a couple of quick thoughts. Number one, Malival, which you saw there on the last photo, is a town in the northern part of Saint-Joseph. So yes, you are right, approaching Condrieu, not far from Côte-Rôtie, etc. And it is known for being cooler. When it gets cooler, the Serine grape, which as Madeleine suggested, is a very old clone, the original clone of Syrah grape, which is really associated with massal selection in the north, becomes even more peppery when it's in cool climates. So you find it up there. You do find it in the south as well, too, because obviously they planted it down there as well. And it picks it up. And you find the Serine clone has a very high quantity of what they call rotundone, R-O-T-U-N-D-O-N-E, which is the characteristic, the compound that gives wines really peppery character. And you find it, we most associate it with Syrah, but you find it in Petit Syrah, you find it in Durif, you find it in Alicante, you find it a little bit in Grenache. You also find it, by the way, in Grüner Veltliner. No surprise there. You find it in Riesling, and you find it not just in the skins, but you also find it in the leaves, you find it in the stems. So when people are throwing back stems or doing whole cluster, they're trying to push their rotundone up further, but it's a great thing. And Monsieur Balliol there is truly one of the great winemakers of the Rhone Valley today, north and south. And his Négoce label is no less any good than his stuff that he owns in Gigondas and in Van Sobra. The only difference is that he doesn't physically own the fruit, but yeah, he does an amazing job.
You know what makes this Syrah really special for me is that nothing commands your attention. All the elements are so integrated. The quality of fruit commands my attention. And I think that's really cool, because as we all know, those of us who've tried to sell Northern Rhone Syrah on the floor, right, that sometimes that combo of overt pepper, overt smoked meat, and garrigue kind of like throws the heads back of Americans that are not familiar with that that combo.
Absolutely. And finally, it does have, somebody brought up before, that sort of olivey, briny character, and that the variety of grape down there, grape of all of the Tache, T-A-C-H-E, which is the classic grape of the Rhone Valley, and specifically the southern Rhone Valley. Literally, you can taste it inside the wine. So let's move on to wine number 6. I feel your pain. You usually get wine number 6 here. I'm going to blast through and go right into the
I'm
nose.
usually the caboose.
I know, and I'm gonna skip my own questions and go right into the nose and
Mhm.
aroma, so we have ample time to talk about it and then go through our discussion. So what I'm getting on the nose here is a very interesting combination that doesn't tell you as much if it wants to be sort of in that sort of non-European vein of having incredibly fruit forward character, but also being in a European vein of having a strong amount of earthiness to it here. So let's address all of those elements. There is fruit here, and I am getting a combination of red, blue, and black fruit. The red fruit is sort of in the berryish vein. There's a little bit of red currant and a little bit of red cherry. And again, I'm going to use your black strawberry thing. I find a little bit of that here too. A little bit of cherry tomato. It's ripe. It's jammy without being overly done, and it's not confected. The blue fruit there and the black fruit there are equally strong. I'm getting again dark berries. I'm getting black currant, aka cassis. I'm getting strong florals, particularly violet, particularly lavender, and an earthier thing, something, or rather an herbal thing, something almost minty, a little bit of bay leaf. Then there's also I'm going to use a soupçon. You like that word? French word, soupçon of tobacco in the wine, and again, a leafy character. There's also some vegetable things, sort of a fennel bulb character. There's a licorice or dill frond character to the wine as well too. And then there's a very strong, deep, dark mushroom character, a deep, dark, almost porcini-like or truffle character. And then the mineral hits, and you're getting this sort of very strong inorganic earth character there that's then nicely framed by some oak. But the oak is present, it's prominent, but it's not sort of sweet and clunky. It's again that sort of bitter, high cacao content, 85 to 90% pure, dark chocolate. There's a walnut character to it. There's a
More
chestnut.
evident the oak than in the other wines. Is
Yeah,
that a fair
exactly,
statement?
exactly.
Yes.
A walnut, a chestnut thing, and then just a deepness and a power to the wine. Let's go ahead and give it a taste.
Mm.
It is chewy, it is bright, it is chunky, it is tannic, but it is also not astringent. It is not mouth ripping. There is I wouldn't call the tannins as supple as what you might find in Pinot Noir or anything like that, but they're also not ripping there. So I would characterize this somewhere between that kind of leaner and rounder character, kind of right in the middle. And I think that's more a function of age. I think as this wine ages some, it will round out beautifully and become smooth and suave, kind of like a Barry White ballad in its own way. All right, so where could we be with this wine? Let's go ahead and jump into grape varieties. So our choices are what? We have Pinot Noir. Talked about that before. You're well familiar with that. We have Barbera, which we associate primarily with Piedmont and Northern Italy, but Barbera in California is capable of making some really dense, powerful, wonderful old vine wines. We have Touriga Nacional, the grape most identified with Portugal and all of its usual kissing cousins and stuff like that, because it's usually not a pure variety. It almost always made into a blend. And then the appropriate countries there, Portugal could speak to you to, I guess, Touriga Nacional only. Europe could be any one of those secondary Pinot Noir and Barbera. Argentina speaks mostly to Touriga. Probably I've had some Tourigas down there that were actually quite good. California, you can be anything. And then, of
Southern
course, you can vote.
Argentina, Pinot Noir.
Yeah, that's true.
Southern
Southern
Patagonia, right? Mhm.
CCC Patagonia, and coastal Patagonia. Very, very interesting stuff
Mhm.
these days. So let's get some votes in. I'm sensitive to time. I'm sensitive to not wanting to overextend and be disrespectful of your time out there in the audience. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I think this is going to be an interesting choice there because there are elements of it that are very Barbera. The darker color, the richness, the bright acid, which is signature to what Barbera is about. And then you have all that sort of je ne sais quoi, interesting flavors and stuff like that. And if you know Touriga, and all those things. You'll find a lot of those elements there. There's an other there. I would love to know what that is. Vote in.
Cabernet
And
Sauvignon.
Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, and I can really see that, especially the intensity, the tannins, the color. And the
Absolutely.
gentleman saying he got pyrazines.
Yeah, and
So
there's a little bit of that sort of herbal thing, the tobacco-y character we talked about before could also lend itself
mhm.
very well to Bordeaux. So we're definitely between 54 and 23. We're 2/3 into the European part of the world, and there is a European sensibility about the wine, and then the rest is California if you're going for that big, heavier, barbarous swing. So let's
And
jump in our
primal
plane.
fruit,
Yeah,
primal fruit.
very primal.
Mhm.
So we're going to leave our friend Monsieur Barriol and all of this. I don't know if he actually vinifies the wines down south or he vinifies them up north for those wines, but we're leaving him. We'll have to ask him next time we see him or
Bye,
send him an
Louis.
email. Bye, Louis. And we're going to jump in our plane, and we're not going super far. We're going to stay in Europe, and we're going to go slightly south and duly west, and we're going to go up into the Douro Valley. Into a beautiful part of the Douro Valley called Simcorgo, or the Simacorgo, or the central part. So you're not as close as the Baix Corgo, which is the part closer to Oporto, and you're not near Spain in the Douro Superior. You're right in the heart of it. And that
Look at
picture,
those terraces.
look at
Wow.
those terraces and those patamares as you look at the river in the far, far background. So we are here at the Quinta de Poeta, which was formerly known as the Quinta de Terra Feta de Cima, until it was purchased by Jorge Moreira. Jorge Moreira, who considers himself a disciple of Dirk Nieporent, was the winemaker at Real Companhia Velha for many years. And when he saw this property in 2001, he said, I must have it. And he
Evan,
bought
by
it.
the way, speaks Portuguese, if you're wondering where that like killer accent's coming from.
And he decided to buy it under consultation with Dirk. And it's a wonderful tapestry of Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, but there's also Tinta Cao, there's also Suzão, there's all sorts of other things. So it's really a field blend led by Touriga Nacional.
Does
And
Pode Poeira mean anything?
yeah, so poeta is I don't know what poeta means. Po means powder. So po de
Oh.
poeta. So I guess powdery was probably where the po in poeta comes from. And this is his quote unquote second wine. So this is the deuxième vin. It's basically younger vines that haven't gone into the poeta and some other lots that are going in there. And it's much more affordable than the poeta, which is a wonderful, incredibly lovely and also very expensive wine, but very worth the price coming from the Douro Valley. And what else could I tell you? This is comes from the little subzone of Providence, or Profesende rather, which sits in the Simcorgo. That's a very classic shot and a classic shot of the now Quinta de Poeta vineyard. Everything is trellised, and those are some seriously vertigo-inducing things. And actually, there are parts of Saint Joseph, I might add, that look just like this. If you're in the northern part of Saint Joseph near Maleval or Chavanay, where we were before. So delightful wine. This is George. It doesn't look like he could have been owning this wine and making vineyard things before that. Probably started when he was like, what, 10 or something like that, but he's an extremely good and very well respected winemaker. And his Po wine, I think, is a delightful wine. And in this whole idea of making one wine, he makes Po, and then he makes a second wine there. This is very much in that whole thing that you have of Grand Vin and Deuxième Vin, or Primeiro Vinho, Segundo Vinho, as they would say in Portugal. So I hope you enjoy that one. I'm going to put the rest of that aside and have it with my lamb chops tonight. So
there I am.
There we go. There you are, Madeline. So I'm going to ask
looking far more,
in a minute. Well, you look great. You look great. You look great in person. You look great in your picture too. But I want to give a big shout out to this. And we only have a small number of kits left. So if you've already bought your kit, thank you. If you have friends who would love to be further wowed by the dulcet tones of Madeline Truffaut, I am particularly excited about this kit because what we're going to look at grape expressions, varieties, and combination of place, and looking at what makes wines classic, what makes varieties classic when associated with specific areas. And Madeline has bespokely selected 6 wines that she think are going to illustrate that. Recording will be available for those of you who buy the kits but can't make that. And there are only 10 seats left. So if you've already bought one, turn it on to your friends. I think Madeline is one of the all-time most amazing educators and best palates I know And this is a treat of a class. I get to join her as the in conversation with moderator, but this is really all about her. And that will
You
be
know, this
on,
was, I'm simply gonna jump in to say this was
yeah.
born from, you know, many of you may have attended, Tim seminars. You know, my style is different and is born from, somebody actually did the math, 37 years of being an examiner on the court, because
Mhm.
I passed in 87 when I was 12. And, just kidding. But it comes from affectionate frustration when hearing people describe, you know, Viognier and call it Sauvignon Blanc. So it's going to be sort of a back to basics expression or discussion or experience of varietals that I think are telling you what they are and going, hi, honey.
And by the way, for those people who are or have friends who are aspiring Jedi Knights and have found in blind tastings, you're doing well, you're doing well, you're doing well, and then you go sideways. This is a really good seminar for you, them, or whatever. I highly encourage folks to do that. And then last but not least, 160A, our next seminar. Tim will be back with us at that point in time, and we will be doing another wonderful Around the World kit at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The kit code, QR code for Madeline's is on the upper right, and for 160A is on the lower left. And with that, we thank you tremendously. I apologize for cutting 5 minutes into your happy half hour, but with that, we're going